Hey guys, Brad here with Custom Offsets. Got episode lists and levels, another 3.5-inch rough country kit. And I know you're probably thinking we've done a million of these, and you're right, we have. I didn't want to do this one, but Lawson's making me. This one's different because it's for an Avalanche, okay? So 3.5-inch kits from rough country for the Chevy trucks are pretty much all the same. They're pretty much just a glorified leveling kit with upper control arms to handle ball joint angles. This kit's no different, but it's for an Avalanche, so it is different. On the Avalanche truck, you got coil springs in the rear rather than leafs, so there's no blocks or anything in the rear. You got these spacers here, which are going to be your coil spring spacers for the rear to lift the rear of the truck up. I believe they are 1.5 inch spacers for the rear. Should probably measure that now before everyone gets mad. So 1.5 inch spacers for the rear, so you're going to lift the rear 1.5 inches and the front 3 inches. These are the spacers for the rear, or for the front. These are going to go on the struts up front. And by the way, I probably didn't mention, this is for an 07 and up Avalanche, so no torsion bar Avalanches. These are for the strut trucks. These are the front strut spacers. You're gonna lift the front 3 inches. They're control arms for the front here. The one thing that I really not crazy about with rough country's 3.5 inch kit is, you know, the whole point of these upper control arms is to correct or handle the new ball joint angle better than factory arms. And for most cases we see they really don't do that great of a job of it, but we'll see on this one if it's any different. Also, you're going to get your sway bar end links for the rear, being that Avalanches have rear sway bars because they're coil sprung and they float all over the road, so you need a sway bar in the rear. You got the front differential skid plate here for when the front diff gets lowered down that tiny little bit that they do on these kits. I believe that these are the front diff spacers. So it does not get dropped down much because there's no cutting on the cross member or anything like that, but it does get dropped down somewhat to help with CV axle angles. That's another thing that's not really crazy about on these 3.5 inch rough country kits. And then last but not least, shock spacers for the rear. You reuse factory shocks on pretty much all Avalanche lift kits out there. This one's no different. So you actually have these brackets which will bolt in place of the factory shock, and then the factory shock will get literally, as you can see, just moved up to here. That's how that works. So you're going to reuse the factory shocks. That's why you see no new shocks in this kit. So that's pretty much it. 3.5 inch rough country kit for 07 and up Avalanche trucks. That's it. Hello everyone, we got the 3.5 inch rough country kit installed in the truck here. Just like the other 3.5 inch kits you've seen for Chevys, it's going to be the same thing up front, although this is an Avalanche kit. So you got your upper control arms here, which you can see are at quite an aggressive angle, but the truck is up in the air. So what really matters is once it's on the ground and all the weight's on and the suspension's loaded. But right now it doesn't look so great. Looking at the tie rod and CV axle angles, in the air, pretty maxed out. You can see the strut spacer up here. That's what's gonna provide all the lift on the truck. And then you can't really see it. Under the truck, the front diff is lowered on these kits a tiny bit with those plastic spacers. Here, come under here, come on. Okay. So the diff is dropped a little bit on this kit, actually. You saw those plastic spacers, they almost look like a body lift spacer. They're going to be about 1.5 inch spacer, and that's what they're going to use to drop the diff. And then, so you do actually have to cut on this kit here. You'll actually have to cut the lower cross member here that ties the two control arm pockets together, the factory one, because you're going to need some clearance for the front diff when it's dropped down there. So there's two cooling fins up here on the diff that you have to actually cut off. So you got to cut the diff a little bit and then that cross member as well. So it's definitely not a no-cut kit, but you got to do that stuff when you want to lower the front differential down and have, you know, good CV axle angles. This particular one, the truck was rusted together, as you can probably see, and So we had to cut the old control arm bolts off, got the new cams in here. You shouldn't have to do that unless yours are destroyed like ours were here. And then in the back, since this is an Avalanche, these are coil sprung in the rear. So you probably can't see it now, but Lawson will get some pictures. There's gonna be the coil spring spacer that's up here. It was on the bench before you saw it. And that's gonna lift the rear of the truck 1.5 inches over stock. So you're doing 3 inches up front, 1.5 inches in the rear. And then the extended sway bar links as well. Because these coil sprung trucks are kind of sketchy once they're lifted. So you definitely wanna have the rear sway bar on there. And no shocks or anything like that, because these kits use the shock extension that we mentioned earlier. You can see it here, so that you can reuse the factory length shock and then you're not gonna overextend it or anything like that. And that's pretty much gonna be it for the 3.5 inch rough country for 07 and up Avalanches. Peace.